Yeah. Okay, we're live. Good evening, everybody, wherever you might be. It's still light here, just getting dark now. And we're continuing on with our McDonald essay
Mm-hmm.
in on the imagination. And I did not actually. Do you know how to copy paste the link into the chat, Luke,
I think
for the essay?
I was
I
trying to
can
figure
do that.
out.
I can do the like for the actual essay. I'm gonna put the link for this here. If
I
anybody
have
wants to
the link
join us.
for the essay. However, I do not know how to access the chat. I was trying to figure it out last time, and
Oh,
I don't know how. Like, I don't know if I have
well, I don't know what your screen looks like. So, and I'm, it
yeah.
should say comments somewhere.
Jed
Somewhere it'll
was a
say
wizard
comment.
last time, so
I mean, if I hang on, maybe I'll. No, I'll. No, I'm not going to bother with it right now.
if you type
The
in George
the
MacDonald the Imagination on Google, you'll find
yeah
it.
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just start reading. I'll read this first paragraph. It's a big one. So,
Yeah, it is. All right.
but as to this matter of creation, is there, after all, I ask yet, any genuine sense in which a man may be said to create his own thought forms? Allowing that a new combination of forms already existing might be called creation, is the man, after all, the author of this new combination? Did he, with his will and his knowledge, proceed wittingly, consciously, to construct a form which should embody his thought? Or did this form arise within him without will or effort of his, vivid if not clear, certain if not outlined? Ruskin, and better authority we do not know, will assert the latter, and we think he is right, though perhaps he would insist more upon the absolute perfection of the vision than we are quite prepared to do. Such embodiments are not the result of the man's intention or of the operation of his conscious nature. His feeling is that they are given to him, that from the vast unknown, where time and space are not, they suddenly appear in luminous writing upon the wall of his consciousness.
Hmm.
Can it be correct, then, to say that he created them? Nothing less so, as it seems to us. But can we not say that they are the creation of the unconscious portion of his
Mhm.
nature? Yes, provided we can understand that that which is the individual, the man, can know and not know that it knows, can create and yet be ignorant that virtue has gone out of it. From that unknown region, we grant they come, but not by its own blind working. Nor even were it so, could any amount of such production, where no will was concerned, be dignified with the name of creation. But God sits in that chamber of our being, in which the candle of our consciousness goes out in darkness, and sends forth from there wonderful gifts into the light of that understanding which is his candle. Our hope lies in no most perfect mechanism, even of the spirit, but in the wisdom wherein we live and move and have our being. Thence we hope for endless forms of beauty informed of truth. If the dark portion of our own being were the origin of our imaginations, we might well fear the apparition of such monsters as would be generated in the sickness of a decay which could never feel, only declare, a slow return towards primeval chaos.
Hmm.
But the Maker is our light.
Yeah.
So he's confronting us with the question of, as he does over and over again, it seems like the question of how creative are we actually, right?
Mm-hmm.
In our imaginations.
Yeah. For what this reminds me of is I know that we use this word all the time in regards to talking about um, the imagination, but we also use the word intuition. Um, and I feel like it definitely is one of those fuzzy areas for me in my own head as to um, what's what's actually informing my intuition. I do believe that it's divine, but it's certainly not my um, any sort of like discursive reasoning or even like my intellect that's informing that intuition. It's coming wholly from another place. Like the
Mhm.
sensory emotional experience that I'm having is informing it, and it is this those are those, and I would say that those are not things that we're wholly conscious of in a moment where we might be receiving some sort of true and viable knowledge about the world, but it's not through any sort of rational faculty that we're receiving that true and viable knowledge about the world, you know.
Yeah,
And
because we're actually not pursuing that,
yeah.
right? At
Yeah.
the time. And Tomberg talks about intuition as he compares it to instinct, actually, which is
Yeah.
really interesting. And as far as location goes, we do locate it elsewhere in our bodies. We call it our gut, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Like we don't locate it in our heads. We actually locate it in all of our senses, really. And I think that's what the whole term, my gut reaction or my gut feeling, right? It's about sensing. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And the idea of instinct, I think that also I remember when I read that, it was last week in the Meditations on the Tarot. I was so excited because people reduce animals to instinct,
I
right?
remember hearing that
And
when
and
you were
according
when
to
you were talking.
Tomberg, and according to Tomberg, instinct is, spiritual touch, because that is for the anthroposophic frame. Intuition is a form of spiritual touch, right?
Mhm.
So you're touching the spiritual world, the unseen or the invisible, you know,
Yeah.
um, and you're receiving something from it. Um, so yeah,
Well,
that's all really interesting.
I feel like a lot of Wendell Berry calls them intangibles. Um, and he'll use the word intangible to describe something like love, or like to describe the virtues, like even something like stewardship or hospitality or what have you. These things you can maybe come up with a good definition of these things, but where they find their um, truest sort of expression is in the actual experience of those things, and you're hard pressed to actually put that into words in any sort of propositional way.
Mhm.
So there is this instinctual sort of like sense,
Yeah.
where there's all these different sensibilities that are coming in this experience of I think I've used this example before, but like hospitality, where it's all I can think of, like even the Danish word like hygge. You go to somebody's house and
Mhm, mhm.
there's this like cozy feel, and it's decorated, and there's as soon as you walk in the door, you're rushed with a sense of like, oh man, somebody's making a stew right now, and it's on the stove, and it smells really
Can
good.
you smell it? I made a stew for supper.
I can smell it right now. Yeah, you're facilitating hygge. I feel like that's probably something that's true all the time in your house, but um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like and then you truly you're feeling this feeling of warmth, or belonging already, and you might not even know whose house you're in, but you're already being welcomed by all these different senses, and all of a sudden it's informing your emotions, and you haven't even had any
Mhm.
sort of like thought, any sort of coherent thought, but like it's all rushing in on you, and your
You can
experience.
also have the opposite experience, right? Like when you go somewhere and suddenly you're creeped out, you get goosebumps or you get a little shiver down your spine
Mm,
or, you know, um, that's
man,
also interesting. And I
well,
think instinctual actions, like, I mean, you talk about the 2, very obvious fight or flight.
hmm,
Um, they can't really be, they can't really be, denied, like, you have to act on them, I think.
yeah.
No, Nate is not coming. Nate is not a part of this anime. Um, yeah,
You could be
so,
on it.
um, I mean,
That's
Nate could come if he wants to. If Nate is listening, Nate,
Jerry,
join
I
us.
wanted to touch on something you just said in regards to like
Mhm.
when you have all the rational faculties to maybe inform you of what you're experiencing, but you don't have the emotion, and the sensibilities aren't reaching you in a way that's actually affecting. I guess what I immediately when you said that, I thought about disassociation and like something that I experience in um, on occasion, where it's like I know that I'm supposed to be feeling a certain way. I know that I'm supposed to have this profound engagement of my sensibilities, like, but they seem so far away, and it truly is a modern, in my opinion, like that is materialism, that is modernity, these are all the um and not that I'm saying that I'm stuck there or whatever, but I feel like
No, no, no.
those are the trappings that are
Can you
encroaching in.
just for my sake, could you give me, like, an example? 'Cause
Yeah,
I think I know what you're talking about, but I just wanna be sure.
I can think of last summer, towards the end of the summer, I was on the beach with my wife and my son, and it was just like and it was beautiful. The sun was setting, like, but it was like I couldn't get into the experience that I wanted to have, and usually this is usually due to stress or something like that, where like
Mhm.
you're thinking about work or whatever, and you can't shut down your mind
Right,
or whatever. You can't
right.
be in the moment, and that's part of it. But there's even more of a sense of like okay, I'm trying to be like the in the honestly, what it is the more you even try to like get into the moment, it's like then all of a sudden your will is playing like a weird game with yourself where you can't suddenly be in that moment with your family, and you're
Yeah.
psychoanalyzing the whole thing, and you're like, why the hell don't I feel what I'm supposed to be feeling right now? And then you get down on yourself and you're like, something's wrong with me.
Well, do you think that, like, finding out that there's no Santa Claus and your first Christmas with that knowledge, did it change Christmas for you? I'm wondering if that's a similar thing
Oh yeah,
because it's a
disenchantment.
disenchantment,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And, but it's interesting how after a while, it doesn't matter if Santa Claus is real anyways, I think that even that phenomenon is really interesting. But I remember my youngest daughter, she had I think I've told this story before too, but she had dinosaurs that she played with up at the creek, and she used to take her dinosaurs after school, and she would go up there and she would, set them all up, and it was a whole world. And, And she was about, I don't know, 12 going on 13, closer to 13, and she said, "Mom, I'm taking my dinosaurs," and her trips up there with her dinosaurs were getting
Mm.
um, less and less, right?
Oh,
And I was really glad. I was like, "Oh, okay, have fun," because I knew that when she was up there, she was in her own world. And she came home within an hour, which was unusual. Usually when she took her dinosaurs, she was gone for, like, the whole afternoon.
mhm.
And she came home after an hour and she was crying and she said, "Mom, I've lost my imagination." That's what she said to me, and she was really distressed about it, you know?
Yeah, that's
And
depressing.
and and there is a moment in our lives, I think, around that age, right, where we, for some reason, we lose our imagination.
Do you think that this is what the shadow is? Or
Well, I
in the
just think
George
about Douglas
MacDonald sense?
Harding. Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I haven't really given the shadow a ton of thought, but like I said before, I think shadows are cast when the sun hits a material object,
Yeah.
right? Um, but Douglas Harding talks about the teenager who looks in the mirror and suddenly is confronted with the image. Like before that, they don't see themselves as the thing in the mirror.
Sure.
And Lance is talking about some of this stuff here. Let's just
Yeah,
read
let's
this.
hear it.
Icon, be like, properly mirror like representation, referring to what is very close in resemblance, like a high definition projection, as defined by the context. The light projecting the image reminded me of what George is talking about with the light. Yes, okay. That's further down in the thing. Maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
But anyway, Douglas Harding talks about the teenager who looks in the mirror and suddenly sees themselves in the mirror, right? And and they believe that what they're looking at is who they are. And
Mhm.
he posits that Douglas in the mirror is not who you are, right?
Yeah.
So,
He
but
talks about
you have to come to that realization. So I think that's actually where that happened for my daughter.
yeah.
When suddenly she couldn't let go of the who was playing with the dinosaurs, right?
Ugh,
Like, I think when you're imagining something, like, I'm just I'm thinking about myself as a kid. When you're playing with dinosaurs or whatever, or Lego or whatever it is, it's not the who that's doing the moving of the things around that you're thinking about. It's the fact that these things they seem to be animated on their own,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
They're like they have a life of their own, but suddenly you become self-aware, right? That you're the person who's actually giving them this life.
Ugh.
You're moving them around. And that's the moment where they become dead objects.
Sure, you're talking about something that I am experiencing almost every single day, and I slip back and forth in and out of it when I'm, like, playing with my son, like and there's times where I am in it and I am on his level and, like, I'm in that
Mhm,
world with him, and it is unbelievable, and then there's times where
mhm.
no matter how hard I try, it's like I can't access it, and it really does. It probably balances on, like, my stress level or something like that, as to
Yeah,
whether or not
yeah,
I can really be there with him.
yeah,
But the whole oh,
yeah,
man, how precious it is when it's like and it's like I'm experiencing that again in ways that I haven't experienced in years, so it's like that's really good. But,
yeah.
yeah, super interesting. Uh, that he talks about with when you see yourself in the mirror too, you lose that immensity, so, like, you go from being this
Yes, the whole
this
world.
the whole world where
Whole
I'm
world.
thinking of Walt Whitman where he talks about, in A Song to Myself, like, he contains multitudes. Um,
Mhm.
and that very idea that there is no beginning and there is no end to
Yeah.
you, and
Yeah.
and and then all of a sudden you're made into this tiny little thing, like you're just minimized and
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. Yeah.
crystallized, and you just become this. I mean, it feels like you're turning into a pillar of salt when you look in
Right.
the mirror,
Right.
you
And,
know?
Matthias Desmet talks about, a child, an infant, not knowing where their body ends and their mother's body begins, right? And he's talking about, like, early infancy.
Yeah,
And there's an interesting phenomenon that happens. So, I should actually read this, see if I can find it.
yeah, do it.
It's about how an infant perceives the world, and what you were talking about there just reminded me of it.
Is this Matthias Desmond?
Matthias
Matthias,
Desmet.
yeah,
Oh,
I've
look at
seen.
that, I have it right here. He has a really good book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and it's way more than that. Like, it's so good.
That's
Um, Let me just make sure I have the right quote here. Um I don't have it. Okay, I've just gotta search it. Hang on a second, it shouldn't be.
we gotta engage in some of these comments too as we move through the paragraph.
Yeah, yeah.
But keep going, because anytime you've quoted this guy in the past, I'm like, what the heck? I gotta
Yeah,
listen to Matthias Desmond. Anytime Sherry
this is a
suggests
little
anything, content wise on YouTube or whatever, or a good book or an article, or it's like that's the stuff I'm trying to check out. That's what I'm.
okay, here it is, I found it. Okay, so he says, "After birth, the child further develops this primal resonance. This doesn't happen." Wait, no, I'm gonna miss that part. I have to go to it. Oh, here it is. Here it is. It's a synchronization. Um Oh, yeah, he talks about mirror neurons here. So when you're having an in real life conversation with people,
Hmm.
you are constantly you have these mirror neurons, and they're always feeling for what the person is talking about. And he talks about during the pandemic how when people were in Zoom meetings all the time, they got tired from, he called it the absence of the other,
Mm,
because you weren't in the same room and your mirror neurons were constantly firing and trying to pick up, but there was nothing to pick up on because you need to be physically present, right? Okay, let me just see here. Early language learning is inseparable from the physical presence of the other. The child internalizes the mother's body language as it satisfies its physical needs with the warmth of her body, the milk of her breasts. The child breathlessly fixates on the mother's face and imitates the expressions that play on it. It listens with the closest attention to the sounds she makes, and even with its earliest sobbing and crying, already echoes the melody and tones of her speech. What's more, the synchronization already takes place before birth in the womb.
hmm.
Um, After birth, the child further develops this primal resonance. This doesn't happen haphazardly. The child achieves a kind of symbiosis with the mother through its creative imitations of her sounds and facial expressions. In this way, it will feel what she feels. As it takes on its mother's happy expression, it also feels her joy. If it takes on her sad expression, it shares in her unhappiness. That's what
Mm,
I wanted to read. Something similar applies to the exchange of sounds. Um, in the clinking and clanging of the mother's language trembles the well and woe of her being, and the child who imitates that language resonates with it on the same psychological wavelength.
wow.
So it's, like this child doesn't have any has no idea where they begin or end, right? And so, hi Chad, good evening. So anyway, it's just super interesting. And then when you think about it in connection to what Douglas Harding talks about, when you go all those years, you go through up to your 12th, 13th year, and you suddenly look in the mirror, and like you say, you become diminished, essentially. Like Harding says, it's no wonder teenagers are angry, right? Because they just had the whole world taken away from them. And they became this tiny little thing, right? And like you said, the pillar of salt idea, he equates that to the actual mirror. So if you tap on the mirror, it's hard, right? It's an inanimate. Yeah.
Oh,
so anyway, we got off on a little tangent there. So let's see here.
yeah, half man, half marble.
Yeah. And anime. Yes, that's right. This mirrors our development of communication with God. That's right. Exactly. Okay, so let's get into this light section down here. Did you want to say anything, Chad?
Only if something comes up. I only have a little time to be on my way home.
Mm-hmm.
Chad, I've admired your tile work in the past.
Oh, thank you, sir.
And all your thoughts and things you share online. Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay,
the moon looks unbelievably gorgeous tonight, by the way. I just wanted to say. It's like this super thin crest, but it's like up, and it's gorgeous. Oh man, sorry. It just had me thinking about how strange all of it is, and beautiful, and like.
Well, even the dark side of the moon is illuminated somehow tonight. Like, did you see that?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet. My sky's not dark yet. Almost. Okay, so do you want to I need someone to help me understand what he's talking about when he says did this form arise within him, or did this form arise within him without will or effort of his, vivid if not clear, certain if not outlined? Ruskin and better authority we do not know will assert the latter. So Ruskin will assert that the form arose within him without will or effort.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is,
and we think he's right. Yeah, okay, so go ahead.
So this is and I feel like George is finally getting to this part that I've tried to talk about in some of our previous conversations with this imagination essay. Where am I extending myself by the vehicle of imagination into divine insight, or is divine insight sort of like reaching down to me? Am I apprehending, or what's the words that are used? We can use a variety of different words to talk about it, but like, is this am I conjuring this?
Well, you asked that question there not too long ago, like how much volition is involved, like how much will is being exercised.
How much
in
of this
right?
is me and how much of this is God? As if there
and
is
how much of you breathing is you, and how much of you breathing is God?
Inventio. Oh, can you hop in here, Ken? I want you to talk to me about this.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with Vervaeke's like definitions, but if you have time, Ken, that would be great. Because he seems to agree with Ruskin that we do it without will or effort.
I loved what Chad just said, because it's like, what is that passive, like you breathe without any sort of like passive. You can breathe well while giving attention to it, and you can control your breathing,
Oh,
but
they
you're
can.
still going to breathe even when you give no attention to it.
But it's
That's
like
right.
it's
Like
for me, it's kind of
it's an
it's almost a
involuntary.
necessity. It's like a necessity for like the creative. Is that what we were talking about? Like the creative imagining, or like when you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So the most honest works I've ever done have been completely almost free gifts. I've heard it described as dinner cooking itself.
Right.
Dinner.
Yeah, I think that.
Okay. What were you going to say about inventio, Ken?
Well, I think that might be a word that gets at what Luke was trying to say, in that notion that there's a problem with the way we think about will and volition. There's a lot of problems with it, and I think it's, at least I find for myself, it's something I tend to automatically assume as kind of like a background substrate on which my actions take place. And it kind of, it does a thing where it kind of makes, I don't know, it makes there to be a strange kind of duality in the space of action that is maybe, it seems to be something of an illusion. And I think the way John uses inventio is this kind of, it's the co-participating of emergence and emanation in the space of action, something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
And therefore the actualization of a potential that's that is happening by itself. I like how you said that, Chad, because that's, I think, how it works. Is it does happen by itself in a sense.
Well, I was talking to somebody earlier today or yesterday about, he was talking about how pop music was like so simple and stuff. And I was thinking, if you think writing a pop song is so simple, why don't you do it? Because it is not. It might sound, it sounds very simple and enjoyable when you listen to a simple pop song, but to write something like that is not simple. You have to tap into, so you have to just, it's, I don't know. Sometimes it's like, it's astonishing to me that the most catchy pop stuff is like, when you hear people talk about it, they talk about it as if it was easy to write. Oh, it just came to me in 20 minutes. It's like, yeah, but you didn't do that. It came to you.
Yeah.
Now, if you sit down to try and write it, it's garbage.
Yeah, they use the term "it came to me," right? It came to me, and then many artists talk about the muse as if it's something from outside of themselves, but there are also it is a participation because you're actually there to meet it, you see.
One night I came home drunk from the bar, and I just got something out of the fridge, and I'm standing at the counter, and literally out of nowhere this line hits me. It says, "This new beginning and chance to breathe I cradle thankfully. What's left to mourn will stand in the wake." Or I can't remember the rest of the line. It was just so simple, and it just came out of nowhere. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I have to write that down, because like, I don't know where it came from. And it's the catchiest hook that I ever wrote. But again, I didn't write that. I'm not that smart.
Yeah.
But are you selling yourself short in saying something like that too? Because
no, because I know my experience with it. It was like boom. It was just right. I know my experience with it. It was literally, I'm standing there at the fridge. I grab something out of the fridge. I turn around, set it on the counter, and right there, the line was right there. I wasn't thinking about trying to write something. I wasn't like in a creative mode. It was just, I was here one moment and bam, it's there in the next.
Yeah. And
those things happen. Like if you sit down, when I sit down to write like short stories and stuff like this, that's how it is. Like, or if I'm working with a prompt, I'll hear the prompt, and all of a sudden I'll have like a flash of images that's pieces of the story, and I almost have the story all at once. And then when you go to write it, it writes itself, and it's incredibly strange, but beautiful.
There's an aspect of this that it makes me think what you're saying, Chad. It makes me think about this notion of distinguishing between using language to describe and using language to explain. And I think explanation has its place, but I've been trying to work on using language mostly to describe what I see and my experience
which is speaking from your own experience.
Yes.
And not what's the word I heard today? Parroting?
Yeah.
Parroting.
You know why that's so important? I'm going to get off right after this. But why I think that's so important, Ken, is because there are things that you can hear in somebody's story or when somebody describes something that are beyond words. There's stuff that happens in between the words of a story that is something like identification. It's like you get to experience the essence of something when that happens. It's like, and you just know it. And it's an incredibly powerful thing. And I just, and it was really, it's just really strange, but I wish I could stay. I just got home from my meeting, but gosh, what a great conversation. I love you guys. Have a good evening.
See you, Chad.
Bye, Chad.
Bye, Chad. Thanks for joining us.
I don't have a ton of time as well. Just FYI, I'll be it's not here shortly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting because this was a question Luke had right from the beginning of this essay, was how much of your will is involved. And I mean, I know I had the weirdest thing happen to me writing a poem one time where I wanted to write about something in particular. And it was to take my mind off something traumatic that had just happened to me. So the thing that I was going to write about was super boring. I was going to write about, I wanted to edit one of my other poems and I couldn't do it. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't do it. And so I wanted to write a poem about why I couldn't edit the other poem.
Nice.
Because I felt
Very
like
nice.
something was stopping me from doing that.
Yes.
And so I wrote this poem and I was happy with it, you know, and then I read it back and it absolutely described the traumatic event that I had just been through, which blew me away. Like it actually, and see, this is the thing about writing that can be quite terrifying, because it's almost like playing on a Ouija board, if you don't mind the, you know,
yeah, if you're really
like,
writing, if you're writing in the space of Inventio, I think that's a really good way of Yeah.
And you're getting messages from beyond, you know, and you're just like, whoa. and yeah.
It's the kind of thing I think that, you know, there's a way in which it's already there in you in a way that you know, but you can't make it into a concept that you can actually grasp and get a handle on until there's, you know, you have to like work your way through that. There's this, have you ever heard of focusing?
Well, I mean, yeah, but I don't know if it's the same thing that you're thinking about.
It's like a therapy. It's like kind of a self-therapy technique. John recommended it in After Socrates, so I got the book and have been reading it and been doing it as a practice. It's really, really powerful. But basically, what it is you try to pick one problem that's facing you and just kind of feel into it. Don't like let go of all the concepts and kind of let the feeling that comes in your body with that problem, and then try to match a word to it until there's a word that resonates. And what you're trying to do is not explain anything about it, but just when you get it's crazy. You get the right word that resonates and your body just goes,
relax. Yeah.
And your experience of the thing changes. And so I think it's something like that. It's like you have
which you know, what that tells me, Ken, is that your body is talking to you.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And when you hear it, when you hear it, it goes, oh, good, thank God. She, she heard me. I was listening to Grimm's reading of Jung's Importance of Dreams. And he actually had a section in there where he talked about people who would suffer psychosomatic illnesses, right? Like they suddenly would be paralyzed and couldn't walk. But psychologically, it was because they just couldn't go on anymore, right? So then their legs would shut off. Or they would develop stomach problems because they couldn't digest something that just happened to them. You see, like it was so interesting. And so there, the body is talking to you.
Yeah.
It definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is actually a big thing for me because I do medicine and I actually talk to people about this all the time. There's some good actually research and books that address this issue. It's not widespread in the medical community because you can't make any money off it, but I've found it to be incredibly true in my experience. It's kind of like, well, why not, right? Like, in what way isn't your body just kind of a giant antenna into your experience
the
of
way
reality?
I look at it, you're wired, like you are essential. Your body is senses. It's a sensory apparatus, and it's taking in information that you have no idea about, right? It's taking that in all the time.
Yes.
And your actual awareness of what has been, absorbed by your body all day long. Like, I mean, you're seeing your body is taken in peripheral vision.
Yeah.
Right. The stuff that you don't see.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then it processes it through the night, right? In the form of dreams.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's also really interesting about that is that because the world is so connected, that it can connect. Like, see, this is what that poetry writing moment told me. I was writing about something that was as banal as an edit on a poem, and it spoke to me about a very personal, very almost tragic event, right?
Yeah.
And they were like almost like word for word the same. That's how connected our world actually is, right? Yeah.
And I think that's what happens when you engage the imaginal, which is the use of the imagination in its proper form.
Yeah.
With true authenticity, genuine, authentic desire towards the good, and then you turn that on and you engage with the world in that way. I think that, at least in my experience, that's the kind of space that allows you to start to be able to see through all of the things that before had been kind of blocked to you. And then they like open up, right? It's like each word that you write, you don't know what you're trying to say. You're sensing it against the feeling that's there. And when you find the one that resonates, you write that one, and then the next feeling comes, and then the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and then pretty soon it's like you look back and you read it, and you're like, what?
How did I do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. Well, we're going to read a little bit more here into the light thing here that he talks about, because it's so interesting. He says, can we not say that they are the creation of the unconscious portion of his nature? So, well, actually, maybe I'll go back. Such embodiments are not the result of the man's intention or of the operation of his conscious nature. His feeling is that they are given to him. And this is what we were just talking about, that from the vast unknown where time and space are not, they suddenly appear in luminous writing upon the wall of his consciousness. Can it be correct then to say he created them? Nothing less so, as it seems to us. But can we not say that they are the creation of the unconscious portion of his nature? Yes, provided we can understand that which is the individual, the man, can know and not know that it knows, can know and not know that it knows, can create and yet be ignorant of that virtue has gone out of it. From that unknown region. Oh, that's so good, eh? Like, that's exactly what happened with that poem. I created a poem that I thought it was about, and yet this other virtue went out of me, and I didn't even know. From that unknown region we grant they come, but not by its own blind working, nor even were it so, could any amount of such production, where no will was concerned, be dignified with the name of creation. But God sits in the chamber of our being, in which the candle of our consciousness goes out in dark. Now, this part, I'm kind of not too straight on. Where the candle of our consciousness goes out in darkness and sends forth from thence wonderful gifts into the light of that understanding, which is his candle.
Mm-hmm.
Someone want to make sense of that?
Our light meeting his light.
Yeah, one of the things I jumped in on, and that's this part, timing, I guess, was everything there. This is all Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've been, Sherry, I started with this, like it's imaging the image. And so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what icons are, right?
Right.
And so think about what we've all been talking about here. Everything is creation that we've been talking about. Where not everything, but we're talking about poems and whether we've all been in that flow state, in that zone. Everything disappears. You're not you're just there. And whether that comes with writing or playing music or poems, or you're a woodworker and you find yourself just in that space, right? So like the image, let us make them in our image icon, right? And we talked about their icon is like, it's reflecting, it's mirrors. It talks about like a high definition projection as a light projecting things out, right? And then just look what you were talking about here. You were talking about naming things. Well, we've got creation, we've got naming, right? You just right there, it started talking about out of the darkness into the light, let there be light, right? We have the speaking. Like I'm going to be ruminating on this a while, Sherry. This is going to be like my Jess Job thing. Yeah. Like I'm just going to be, because as you've been talking about this, Sherry, for 3 weeks now, 4 weeks. I mean, it's been a while. Yeah. You've been sharing in the Voxer stuff. And I just keep hearkening back to Genesis 1.
Right.
And it's all this imaging, right? It's all this imaging in flow and projection. And so I think like when you talk about, we're in the garden. There wasn't this veil. There wasn't this cloud. You were face to face. For me, it's Christ, God, right? But you're face to face, and there was no shame, right? It just, all that stuff was there, and you're just in it.
Which is that child? Yeah, that's mother, that childlike right? So phase. Yeah.
At that, there was a time where we didn't know where we ended and God began, right? And that's the point of where we try and get to, like you hear the monastics talk about in a Jesus prayer, when you get to this point to where time stops and it's no longer you and God, it's just God, right?
Yeah.
And so this art of imagination and creation, it's all of this. So why does Peter Kreeft say music is the language of heaven, right? And why does he talk about poetry as like that next level down? Well, okay, now we're in this creative, non-rap flow, just evoking the feelings, that thing that came to Chad. And I love that came to him when he's drunk. God will use you whenever he wants, and he'll break forth. And even in your sin, he's there shining through. I don't know. You guys got me up. I was getting ready to go to bed, and this is really firing me up. And when you were sharing this before, I'm not very smart, so I have to hear things a bunch of times. You had talked about, you had read and shared this George MacDonald thing, and for the first time, I'm hearing it and seeing it. And then I think about Job. I heard you, but now I see you.
Oh,
yes, image. Let us make man in our image, our icon. So, at any
Mhm.
rate, that's a lot of riffing and stuff. And I just want to throw the reason why I'm doing this is I want to throw this into your rumination, Sherry, because I know
Yeah,
you're
thank you.
really going deep on this.
Yeah,
But man, that's what I'm seeing over and over.
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Well,
just
the thing that I didn't understand about this sentence here is that in the chamber of our being, in which the candle of our consciousness goes out in darkness.
so
Is he saying? What is he saying there?
I keep on thinking about the word like incandescent light and incantation, like as if the lamp that we bring, even with I don't know. I'm going to stop there because I don't actually have any coherent thought on that.
Can you read that again, Sherry, please?
God sits in the chamber of our being, in which the candle of our consciousness goes out in darkness and sends forth from there wonderful gifts into the light of that understanding, which is his candle. Like I'm having trouble trying to figure out what that looks like.
I think we offer our finite images, these.
I think it's kind of like
Oh, we go
One
out
of-
into the unknown. The candle of our consciousness goes out into the unknown, right? The
I think-
darkness. Is that what he's saying? And sends forth from there wonderful gifts into the light of that understanding. God sends wonderful gifts into the light of of that understanding, which is his candle. Oh my goodness. Like that's just
okay. Here's how I'm
confusing to
hearing
me, that
this is
sentence.
like if you imagine
not to
going
you
back.
guys.
What's that?
Go ahead.
If you imagine going back to the very primordial point of your experience and that going out, I think that's what he's talking about, like the place at which that goes out and becomes darkness. Like it's from behind that space that God is putting forward into light.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's avoiding a solipsism that could be potentially running through as a thread here, and he's inverting the position of the individual. I think that's what he's doing there. That's just my read, but I don't know.
I was thinking it
I'll
was
have to think on it.
related to this idea of like if there is a gap in our understanding, our imagination can actually fill that void, and it will do so. And so in this movement towards the revitalization of our imaginations, we don't need to close the gaps. We need to open the gaps wider. And that's also comes with this trust that the light that we have is couched within a much larger light. At least in earlier on in the essay, remember that our imagination is couched within the imagination of God. And so there's this, and if we are talking about our imaginations as lights, like our little light is within this larger light.
Right. Okay. So that's what that, yeah. Okay. I'm trying to form an image of what that looks like, and I'm not getting it in my head, but it'll come.
He bridges that gulf. So remember, there's this big gulf between, he talked earlier on in the essay about how there's this gulf between the imagination of man and the imagination of God, and that God bridges this gulf.
God doesn't have to pass over it to get to us, but we can't pass over it. And it's filled with
infinite
multitudes of revelations.
Yeah.
Right? Revelation, right? And so I have this picture in my head of those revelations as like stepping stones, that get you across this little chasm.
Glimpses.
Towards, yeah. Just hanging by a thread.
Slivers
To a
of
little
light.
glimpse.
Yeah.
I'm sure I saw it. You can't convince me otherwise.
The picture.
Okay, I'll just read this last sentence. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say quickly, the picture that has worked decently well for me is that, like, picture two spheres, a smaller sphere inside of a larger sphere, and they're both expanding outward, but the larger sphere is expanding more quickly at a higher rate, and the outer sphere is like something like the totality of my sense data, right? If we to tie in the metaphor of our body that we used earlier. And that's expanding faster than the smaller circle, which is that which is available for me in kind of a conscious way. And the center of that circle is, say, the candle that he uses here, right? And of course,
Right.
the layers that God's present at every layer in all kinds of different ways. But you can in the small sphere, it's more or less full of light and more or less full of darkness, depending on how many, shall we say, motes are in your eye, and or sins, right? And when you have those in the way, you're not able to be in connection with the imagination of God, shall we say, and you're not picking up on the sense data, and this can come up as blocks in your body. It becomes obvious as sins in a social setting, etc. And like, I love your stepping stones, because those stepping stones are like blips that pop up behind where you have blockages to tell you, like, here's where you can open, something like that. That's kind of the picture I like.
Okay.
Does that resonate for you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, sticking with the essay here, like he says that our imagination is made in the image of the imagination of God, and it is in the imagination of God that we live and move and have our being. And I'm just randomly thinking, while you were talking, because you mentioned the body, and I have this affinity for why we have a body, right? And I've always thought of the body as a sensory apparatus, right? Collecting information that, like he says, we don't even know that we know. Okay. We don't even know what our body knows. Right.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
I think, when I think about that, I think about the fact that it's corruptible, right? The body is corruptible. So it's weak. And this is one of the things that I got hung up on when I thought about the body. Why am I given this body? Like, not that I want a different one, but the question is why? Because I think there's a reason why, right? Because it's like, I think of it as a pincushion, really. Like, it's so easily violated by the outside world, right? If it isn't germs or sharp objects or emotional distress or whatever the case might be, right? It's always being pummeled, but at the same time, it's extremely resilient, right? And it's continuously healing itself. And so it's meeting this world in a way that I have no idea about. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's carrying this little light of mine with it, you know, like it's carrying that around. And then I think about, you know, that the wisdom of God is foolishness to men, right? And that his strength is made perfect in weakness. And that's precisely what my body is. And so then I have to conclude that somehow there's a wisdom in my body that is greater than that of my mind.
Wow.
Yes, very nice. Very nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was beautifully said.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read this last sentence here. Our hope lies in no most perfect mechanism, even of the spirit, but in the wisdom wherein we live and move and have our being, which is God's imagination, creation, our finitude, our body, right? Thence we hope for endless forms of beauty informed of truth. If the dark portion of our own being were the origin of our imaginations, we might well fear the apparition of such monsters as would be generated and in the sickness of a decay which could never feel, only declare a slow return towards primeval chaos. But the Maker is our light.
Yeah. That's a huge move. You can basically upload you can take all of the Jungian framework, and if you take Descartes out from under it, if you take the notion of kind of a monadic substantial self out, and then you upload all of Jung, it gets so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what do you mean? I'd love to hear more.
Well, at least my understanding.
Well,
go ahead.
No, I'm listening.
Oh, I was just going to say my understanding of like Jung and Freud and kind of the unconscious and all those kinds of issues. The difficulty that I always had with it was the kind of understanding there was some kind of sub/unconscious that was just in me, in here, that was, kind of boiling up from underneath, shall we say. And then, but once things started to fall apart around the notions of the self and kind of a monadic Cartesian substance kind of self, then the notion of what the unconscious means and what it's not as if Jung doesn't talk about the collective unconscious, but it's not clear to modern people how one might access the collective unconscious. That's just kind of like some strange, how does that work? But I think for me, it had a lot to do with the monadic self is a whole thing. It's not as if that was the only area that made a huge and continues to be a battlefield.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if that all made sense, but I'm maybe throwing some things from left field there.
No.
And what you're talking about there, Ken, and then what you'll hear like monastics or other people talk about in orthodoxy is, people say, why would they be weary of the imagination? It's that dark place, right? It's that self place, and the imagination directed properly towards the true light, towards God, focused on those right, true, good, all those things, right? That's the proper use of your imagination, is towards the beauty, the goodness, the true, those things. The heavens declare my glory, right? All these sorts of things. We can see it in nature. We can see it in each other, right? All that sort of stuff. And so I think it's getting to that. It's not saying don't write the Lord of the Rings. That's not what they're saying. People will say that's what it means, but that's not what they're saying. But it's to make sure that you're in that pure place and not that dark place, that self place, right? Because we have a lot of imaging going on in the world today that is not good. It's not leading people to places of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and all that stuff. It's going the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
I think it's, oh.
No, you go ahead, Jerry, sorry.
Well, I think it's just a good reminder to know that, that he says that the work of the or the duty of the imagination is to find out the works of God, right? And that's what keeps you, out of those less desirable places. And he wouldn't call that imagination, actually. He declares that for God. He calls it fancy, like Coleridge. So as long as George is talking about imagination, he's talking about something that's divine. Right. And I think he's actually playing, like you said, Lance, he's playing on that idea of image, right? Imagination and image of God. That's kind of what he makes clear at the beginning of the the essay. Yeah.
Yeah, just look at his work, right? Lilith, Fantasticides, all these amazing works, you know. Clearly, he's not saying don't go out and write these amazingly beautiful, mind-blowing fairy tales. You know, it's not
Yeah,
saying
well,
don't
see,
do
this is
that.
the thing that frustrates me a little bit, because as soon as you start talking about imagination, people think that what you're talking about is made up. But this is what George is saying over and over again. Nothing is, you don't make ex nihilo.
It's
Okay.
Right.
impossible.
These things are not made up. You
Yeah.
didn't create anything. You light the lamp within the forms, the representations, which are found in creation all around you.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you're doing, is you're lighting them up, and the meaning is already there. They contain the meaning already. So you're basically just putting together what actually is.
Right.
Yes.
Well, what he
That's what
writes
you're
is
doing. You're
truer than
talking
true.
about reality.
Yeah. It's what he writes
You're
is
talking
truer
about
than
reality.
true. Yeah, truer than true, realer than real. It is. It's pointing you right to God through all of this. What he's
It
doing.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
One way
is.
to think about it is if you use that sphere image that I talked about earlier, and you imagine that each of us are contiguous spheres, something like that. It's like, well,
I have imagined that.
if you're if I properly lighten my sphere, then it can be seen by others as a reference point toward the good. Like, that's one way of thinking of it, I think, in like the life of a saint who calls other people and maybe even ultimately actually shines forth a likeness of God in a certain aspect.
Mm-hmm.
All it means is that they inhabited that container space that was available to them in such a way that it was lightened to that degree.
It's interesting that you mentioned the saints, because my patron saint is Saint Seraphim of Serov, and I chose him because he lived in the woods and he was friends with wild animals. And one of the thinking of the German word here, trademarks. No, that's not the word. One of the things that sets saints apart is that they have a relationship with wild animals oftentimes, right? And I think it was Saint Isaac the Syrian that said that they can smell paradise on the saint, and this is why they have no problem just communing, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and so what's also interesting about that is, like, in Russia, these monks and hermits and saints would wander out into the woods to be alone, right? And then all the people from the village would go to them for wisdom or healing or whatever the case might be. And then a town would form near the hermit. Okay. And then these monks would move further out, and then the people would all follow, right? And this is how a lot of the wilder, more remote areas of Russia got settled.
That's so
where
cool.
monks were running away from people.
That's amazing. Amazing.
But essentially the people were following the light.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they were doing.
To the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was like, it wasn't evangelization. There was no, it was the opposite. It was like almost the opposite.
In AA, they talk about it's a program of attraction rather than promotion, right?
Yeah.
And we've all been in a room. We've all been in a room with people that have that palpable emission. I guarantee, if you haven't, I feel sorry for you, but I have been, right? Like, we've been in those rooms with those people, and one of the things happened, like Sherry, when I talked about that moment when I got my press down or whatever, and this thing was happening. Well, I'll just share a couple things. I've shared it before. One, right in the midst of that, I couldn't look in a mirror. My head kept getting moved down to the side because what I intuitively knew is, well, I'm just gonna say like a Moses thing. Like I knew I couldn't look because it was God. Another weird thing is I'm not a huge animal person, and yet our cat and the animal, they wouldn't get away from me. My friend came from Minnesota and his 2 young boys. Like I kept going up to pray. I was in flow state. I was connected, right? And I was praying, and all of a sudden look around. Both of his little boys were right by my bed praying. They were just sitting there. They couldn't get away from me.
Mhm.
And I wish I lived a pure life and I was a saint or whatever. I lost my sobriety after having that experience. So I am not a saint. But there are moments that's the thing, right? And I still haven't figured out why God gave this sinner that experience.
Because we're all sinners, Lance.
Yeah, but
That's
you know what
why.
I mean? Like there's a real humbling about it. And
Well, I think, man, that's the right question, right? That's the right question, because I resonate with that experience very deeply. I understand. For me, the
Nice.
horror of it is
Mm.
having, the days when I'm so obviously not there, and it's so powerful to me, and it's so easy for that aspect of myself that is such a cynic, such a cynic sometimes, and that's when it's hard.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read another short paragraph. See what George.
I do need to go.
He
I do
pat-
need to go. It's been
Okay.
lovely.
It was
see you,
great to
Ken.
have you.
Yeah, thanks for
See you,
coming,
Ken.
Ken.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Anytime.
I will let you guys go. I crashed your party. You guys I love it. I love you too. Keep doing this. I'll get out of here. You got me all buzzed up.
All right,
and
Lance.
We loved having you.
Yeah, it was great. It was awesome. I
Yeah.
love it when people join. See you.
Bye.
Okay, one word more ere we turn to consider the culture of this noblest faculty, which we might well call the creative. Did we not see a something in God for which we would humbly keep our mighty word? The fact that there is always more in a work of art, which is the highest human result of the embodying imagination, than the producer himself perceived while he produced it, seems to us a strong reason for attributing to it a larger origin than the man alone. For saying at the last that the inspiration of the Almighty shaped its ends. We return now to the class which from the first we supposed hostile to the imagination and its functions generally. Those belonging to it will now say, okay, so these are people who don't like the imagination. It was to no imagination such as you have been setting forth that we were opposed, but to those wild fancies and vague reveries in which young people indulge, to the damage and loss of the real in the world around them. Excuse me.
Would you like me to keep going?
Yeah. Do you want to read?
Yeah, definitely. And we insist you would rectify the matter by smothering the young monster at once, because he has wings, and, young to their use, flutters them about in a way decomposing to your nerves, and destructive to those notions of propriety of which this creature, you stop not to inquire whether angel or pterodactyl, had not yet learned even the existence.
I love
Or, or if it is only the creature's vagaries to which you disapprove, why speak of them as the exercise of the imagination? As well speak of religion as the mother of cruelty, because religion has given more occasion of cruelty, as of all dishonesty and devilry, than any other object of human interest. Are we not to worship because our forefathers burned and stabbed for religion? It is more religion we want. It is more imagination we need. Be assured that these are but the first vital motions of that whose results, at least in the region of science you are more than willing to accept. That evil may spring from the imagination as from everything except the perfect love of God cannot be denied, but infinitely worse evils would be the result of its absence. Selfishness, avarice, sensuality, cruelty would flourish tenfold, and the power of Satan would be well established ere some children had begun to choose. Those who would quell the apparently lawless tossing of the spirit, called the youthful imagination, would suppress all that is to grow out of it. They fear the enthusiasm they never felt. And instead of cherishing the divine thing, instead of giving it room and air for healthful growth, they would crush and confine it. With but one result of their victorious endeavors, imposthume, fever, corruption. And the disastrous consequences would soon appear in the intellect likewise, which they worship. Kill that whence spring the crude fancies and the wild daydreams of the young, and you will never lead them beyond the dull facts, dull because their relations to each other and the one life that works in them all must remain undiscovered. Whoever would have his children avoid this arid region will do well to allow no teacher to approach them, not even of mathematics, who has no imagination. Wow.
Wow, hey?
Yeah.
I have to read. You go ahead and talk. I'm listening.
Well, I'm trying to remember the part that stuck out to me the most. I guess. Hold on, let me read here. Are we not to worship because our fort? Okay, it is more. Okay, he says it is more religion we want. It is more imagination we need, because I feel like the argument he's saying is, because our imagination can, dream up all these, I don't know, these things that seem like ends in themselves or something like that. That we wouldn't want more of the imagination, like as if he's trying to basically say, like, here's the supposed harms of the imagination, right? And whether that be fancy or the imagination put to some ill end. But the reality is that closing the doors of the imagination would not be the right course of action. He's saying that they need to be opened wider. We need more access to the imagination, just because we need more religion, not less religion. It wasn't.
And I think yeah, I think the reason that he's saying that is because the meaning is already in the form, right? Yeah. And so if you want to know who God is and what he's trying to tell you, teach you, and how he expresses his love for you, you have to exercise enough imagination to light the lamp within those forms, right? So you need to see the world symbolically. You need to see the world thrown together, right? So that, like I said, there are no more dead metaphors, right? Well, that a dead metaphor only, that becomes a mystery to the future generations. They're like, I never heard of a dead metaphor. Every metaphor I know is alive, because everything is thrown together, right? And this is what, to me anyway, this is what MacDonald is shooting for. He wants people to well, I'm just gonna read a little bit of Phantastes. It's kind of, I know we're gonna get to it when we get to Phantastes.
Yeah.
But I think that like in the essay, he says, hang on a second here. he says, and we insist you would rectify the matter by smothering the young monster at once because he has wings and young to their use flutters them about in a way discomposing to your nerves and destructive to those notions of propriety of which this creature. And you don't stop to ask whether this creature is an angel or a pterodactyl, right? But he's flying around with his wings. Like he's imagining a child, just and you're just going to just shut that down, like without any questions about what's really happening there. So that reminded me of this excerpt from Phantastes. So there's a knight and he meets a young girl, and she asks him for his help because she's collecting butterfly and moth wings. And they're literally giving them to. She asks the butterflies and the moths for the wings, and they give them to her. And so he says, so I armed myself to be ready for anything that might happen and followed the child. For though I could make nothing of her story, I could see she was a little human being in need of some help or other. Like that was good enough, right? Like this is when, we talked about this. I don't know if it was last week or the week before about George saying that these theologians don't look low enough, right?
Yeah.
Like this is what he's talking about, right? She I could see she was a little human being in need of some help. As she walked before me, I looked attentively at her. Whether or not it was from being so often knocked down and walked over, I could not tell, but her clothes were very much torn, and in several places her white skin was peeping through. I thought she was humpbacked, but on looking more closely, I saw through the tatters of her frock. Do not laugh at me, he says. A bunch on each shoulder of the most gorgeous colors. Looking yet more closely, I saw that they were of the shape of folded wings, and were made of all kinds of butterfly wings and moth wings, crowded together like the feathers on the individual butterfly pinion, but like them, most beautifully arranged and producing a perfect harmony of color and shade. I could now more easily believe the rest of her story, especially as I saw every now and then a certain heaving motion in the wings, as if they longed to be uplifted and outspread. But beneath her scanty garments, complete wings could not be concealed, and indeed, from her own story, they were yet unfinished. And then they go on, and whenever she asks the butterflies for wings, some invisible monster knocks her down and walks on her, right? And they become visible when he hits them with his sword, and it turns out that they're wooden men. Okay. And like, this is my favorite story in Phantastes.
Yeah.
Because this is who he's talking about in the essay. These people that just shut down this kid who's either an angel or a pterodactyl, right?
Yeah.
And they don't ask any questions. They don't inquire into what's happening. They just shut it all down. And so the way that the knight, he can't chop them up. He can't hit them with his sword, because if he does, they break into little splinters, and then they live. Every splinter turns into another one of them, right? Which is like,
that's not good.
It's so good. And I think what he's talking about there, I'll just say it. This is my opinion. I think what he's talking about there is the fragmentation of Protestantism. You know how people just keep making new denominations.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But what he ends up doing is he figures out that if he stands these wooden men on their heads and leans them up against a tree, they can't move. And so what he's essentially saying in the way I interpret this story is that you have to see things from another perspective. You have to see the world upside down, right? So that the material is no longer the thing that you're looking at the supernatural first and not the material world.
Okay.
That's what I take from the story. I
No.
so love this story.
Well, I mean, it perfectly maps on this paragraph that we're reading because
I know.
that my instinct in reading that too, to further go on to say that, like, in a rejection, if you were gonna like reject the imagination wholesale, as if that were possible, if that were even possible, which I don't think it's kind of like this. All you're doing is reacting to it, so you're still stuck within the spectacle of the imagination. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, even in your attempts to squash it and crush it in your it's a reflection of how powerful the imagination actually is. It almost doesn't diminish it, because it's like you're just proving you're proving how powerful this thing actually is. I don't know if that makes sense.
The power in it is that you can soar, you can fly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You get wings.
Exactly.
Right? And those wings are made from the world around you, and they're colorful, and you didn't make them ex nihilo. You had to ask the butterflies and the moths for them, right?
Yeah.
And you combined them together to make something new. And this is what he talks about in this essay, So, you're looking pretty tired there, Luke. Shall we call it?
Oh, I am getting sleepy, you know it.
Yeah, I do. I can see it.
Oh,
Why don't we
isn't that obvious?
why don't we come back to this? Because there's a lot more in there, and it's, I mean, he has a very sharp critique about religion. Like when he says, "Are we not to worship because our forefathers burned and stabbed for religion?" Wow.
Well, that's what I was kind of trying to get at, was like, there's this way in which even this reactionary, like this complete and total distortion of the religion is like, still serves as a negative example, but it still serves towards its authenticity in this weird way. Like, the inversion never escapes the spectacle that the inversion is inverting from,
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of the point I was trying to make, but I don't have
Yeah,
the
and I would say too that, like, he even goes so far as to say that they burned and stabbed because of a lack of imagination,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Because they were total materialists, rationalists.
Yeah.
And that's what caused it. And
Yeah.
that's why, like he says, whoever would have his children avoid this arid region would do well to allow no teacher to approach them who has no imagination. And I mean, that's the world that I think we live in. We live in a world now, in my opinion, that has no imagination. It supposes that it knows everything.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
there's nothing that's going to put out your light quicker, if it were possible. That's why you got to keep that little light shining.
Yeah.
This little light. Yeah, Sherry, I would love to keep going, but I think you'd be carrying this one.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't want to carry it.
yourself.
I don't want to carry it because it's so much more fun if we can combine our imaginations. So
Exactly.
okay, good. Well, then we'll close it off here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We
Yeah,
had a
that was
whole
fun.
6 people all the way through. That was great. Good
Very
night, all, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see ya.